July 2024, Clearwater Bay, Florida. When Emma Torres woke up 7 months pregnant to find the attic access panel hanging open above her hallway, a panel she'd never noticed in 4 months of living there, she knew someone had been in her house while she slept. The wooden ladder was still down, fresh dust scattered across the floor below. Her husband Daniel had already left for his 12-hour shift at the marina. The doctor had put her on bed rest after her blood pressure spiked dangerously high. And now she stood alone, staring up into darkness, listening to the sound of breathing that wasn't her own. What Emma discovered in that attic wasn't a ghost or an intruder in the way she'd feared. It was something far more complicated. A woman who'd been living above her head for weeks. A miniature house built inside the larger one. And a secret that connected two mothers across 5 decades of pain, survival, and the terrible choices women make when the world offers them no safe place to exist. Emma's hands were shaking when she dialed Daniel's number. The call went straight to voicemail. She tried again, same result. He was probably elbow deep in some boat engine, phone buried in his work bag, completely unreachable for the next 10 hours. She stood in the hallway of their rented duplex, staring up at the open panel in the ceiling, and felt her pulse hammering in her throat. The ladder was old, wooden, worn smooth by decades of use. It hadn't been there last night when she'd gone to bed, she was certain. Emma had developed the paranoid habit of checking every corner of the house before Daniel left for work each morning, had memorized every crack in the ceiling, every stain on the walls. This panel, this ladder, they'd been invisible yesterday, and now they weren't. Someone had opened it, someone had climbed down, and that someone might still be up there. Emma pressed both hands against the swell of her belly, feeling the baby shift inside her like it sensed her fear. 7 months pregnant, blood pressure through the roof, explicitly forbidden by her doctor from climbing stairs or experiencing stress. And here she was, alone in a house that had just revealed a secret entrance, contemplating the worst decision of her life. She should call the police, that was the logical choice. But if she called police, they'd want to know why she hadn't noticed the attic access before. They'd ask questions about the sound she'd been hearing for 3 weeks, the footsteps, the creaking, the soft humming that drifted through the ceiling at night. They'd wonder why she'd never mentioned it to anyone except Daniel, who dismissed it as house settling and told her pregnancy hormones were making her paranoid. Emma had learned over the past 7 months that being a pregnant woman meant having your perceptions constantly questioned. Every concern was hormones, every fear was anxiety, every instinct was overreaction. She was tired of not being believed. So instead of calling the police, Emma did something stupider. She climbed. Each rung sent a sharp ache through her hips. The baby pressed against her lungs, making it hard to breathe. But she kept going, one hand gripping the ladder, the other braced against the ceiling opening for balance. When her head cleared the threshold, she stopped. The attic was not what she'd expected. It wasn't a crawl space crammed with insulation and forgotten boxes. It was a real room, roughly 15 feet by 20, with a sloped ceiling and a small dormer window that led in a shaft of dusty afternoon light. The floor was finished hardwood. The walls were actual drywall, painted a faded cream color that might have been white decades ago. And in the center of this impossible room stood something even more impossible. A house, a miniature house, built to perhaps 3/4 scale, with walls, windows, a pitched roof, and a small blue door. It looked like something from a dark fairy tale, simultaneously charming and deeply wrong. Emma pulled herself fully into the attic, her bare feet finding the floorboards, and moved closer. The miniature structure was old but carefully maintained. Someone had built this with deliberate skill, with attention to detail that spoke of love or obsession or both. The windows had real glass. The door had a brass knob that caught the light. There was even a tiny porch with a railing. She crouched as low as her belly would allow and peered through one window. Inside, she could make out furniture scaled to match the house. A narrow bed, a small table and chair, shelves lined with objects she couldn't identify from this angle. And on the table, a candle, recently burned, its wick still black, a thin trail of wax hardened down its side. Someone had been here, recently, maybe was still here. Emma's hand moved to the miniature door before her brain could stop her. She turned the brass knob. It opened with a soft creak. The smell that rushed out was complex, lavender and dust, and something underneath, something human. Sweat and breath and occupation. Emma's pulse roared in her ears as she pushed the door wider and leaned in. The interior was dim, lit only by the weak sunlight filtering through dusty windows. Everything inside was functional, real. The bed had blankets. The shelves held jars, books, a chipped ceramic mug. And covering one wall, photographs. Dozens of them, pinned and taped in overlapping layers. Faces staring out from black and white frames with hollow, watchful eyes. Then Emma heard it. Breathing, slow, deliberate, coming from the shadows at the back of the miniature house. "Hello?" Her voice came out thin and shaking. Silence. Then movement. A figure shifted in the darkness, unfolding itself from a crouch. As it moved into the light, Emma's entire body went rigid. It was a woman, old, impossibly frail, with gray hair matted and wild around a face carved deep with lines. She wore layers of fabric that might have once been a blanket, wrapped around her like a shroud. Her eyes were the worst part, pale and sharp, gleaming with intelligence and something else Emma couldn't name. The woman stared at Emma without blinking. Her mouth opened slightly, revealing yellowed teeth. "You shouldn't have come up here," she whispered. Her voice sounded like paper tearing. Emma scrambled backward so fast she slammed her hip into the miniature porch railing. Pain shot through her side, and the baby kicked hard, a protest against the sudden violence. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only stare at this impossible woman emerging from an impossible house in an attic that shouldn't exist. "Who are you?" Emma managed to force out. The woman tilted her head, bird-like, as if listening to something Emma couldn't hear. Then, slowly, deliberately, she smiled. It was not a kind smile. Emma didn't remember climbing down the ladder. Her body moved on pure survival instinct. Hands gripping rungs, feet finding purchase, brain screaming at her to move faster, get away, put distance between herself and whatever she'd just seen. She hit the hallway floor hard, pain shooting up through her ankles, and immediately shoved the ladder back up into the ceiling. The panel swung shut with a soft click. She stood there gasping, both hands pressed against her belly, feeling the baby's frantic movement inside her like it had absorbed her terror. Her phone was in her pocket. She pulled it out with shaking hands and tried Daniel again. Voicemail. Again. Voicemail. She sent a text. "Someone living in our attic. Call me now." Then she locked herself in the bathroom, the only room in the house with a solid door and a lock, and sat on the closed toilet lid. The baby moved restlessly inside her, and Emma whispered apologies she didn't think either of them believed. An hour passed, then 2. The afternoon sun slanted through the bathroom's frosted window, turning everything amber and strange. Emma's phone buzzed. Daniel. "Working late, storm damage on 3 boats. Be home by 10. What's wrong?" She typed back with trembling fingers. "There's a woman living in our attic. In a tiny house, I saw her. 3 dots appeared, pulsed, disappeared. Then, Em, are you okay? Did you take your blood pressure meds? Emma threw the phone into the sink. Of course he didn't believe her. Why would he? It sounded insane. She barely believed it herself, and she'd seen the woman's face, heard her whisper, smelled the strange mix of lavender and human occupation seeping from that miniature door. By the time Daniel came home that night, Emma had every light in the duplex burning. She was sitting at the kitchen table, rigid and watchful, tracking every sound from above. Daniel took one look at her face, and his expression shifted from confusion to concern. Em, what happened? She told him everything. The open panel, the ladder, the attic room, the miniature house, the woman. He listened without interrupting, but she could see doubt creeping into his eyes like fog. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he sighed and ran a hand through his salt-stiff hair. Okay, let's go look. They climbed together, Daniel going first, his broad shoulders barely fitting through the opening. Emma followed more slowly, her body still aching from the earlier ascent. When they reached the attic, Daniel stopped so abruptly she nearly collided with him. Jesus Christ, he breathed. The miniature house stood exactly as Emma had left it. In the beam of Daniel's flashlight, it looked even more surreal, a perfect little structure that had no business existing in this forgotten space above their rental. Daniel approached it like it might bite. He crouched, peered through the window, then carefully opened the small blue door. His flashlight beam swept the interior. "There's no one here," he said. Emma pushed past him and looked for herself. The miniature room was empty. No woman, no blanket shroud. But the photographs were still plastered across the wall. The candle still sat on the table, wax pooled around its base. And when Emma touched it, the wax was warm. "She was here," Emma said, her voice breaking. "I saw her. I talked to her." Daniel didn't argue. He just stood there, staring at the impossible house, his jaw working silently. Finally, he said, "We need to talk to the landlord." Vince arrived the next morning, smelling of cigarettes and looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. He climbed into the attic with them, took one look at the miniature house, and went very still. "I told the bank this was sealed," he muttered, more to himself than them. "What's gone?" Emma demanded. Vince rubbed his face, suddenly looking much older. The house was built in 1947 by a man named Arthur Brennan. He was a carpenter, built custom work for wealthy summer people. But his wife, Helen, she got sick. Agoraphobia, they called it back then. Couldn't leave the house, couldn't be around people. Got worse after their daughter was born. He paused, staring at the miniature structure. Arthur built this for her, a practice house. Helen would spend hours up here every day, going through the motions of normal life, waking up in the tiny bed, making breakfast in the tiny kitchen. She'd pretend to leave through the tiny door, then come back in, over and over, rehearsing for a life she couldn't actually live. "How long did she do this?" Daniel asked quietly. 20 years. Arthur died in 1965, heart attack. After that, Helen never came out of the attic. Neighbors didn't know she was still here. By the time anyone found out, he trailed off. "She died up here," Emma finished. Vince nodded. 1967. Inside that little house. She'd been dead for weeks before anyone found her. Emma felt the blood drain from her face. Her hands moved instinctively to her belly, protective. "But I saw someone," Emma whispered. "Yesterday, I saw a woman." Vince looked at her for a long moment. Something shifted in his expression. Helen had a daughter, Margaret. She was different. Developmental problems, they said. After her mother died, the state took her. Institutions, group homes, halfway houses. She kept running away. They'd find her, bring her back. This happened for years. "Where's she now?" Daniel asked. "No one knows. She disappeared about 5 years ago, stopped showing up at her supervised housing, never seen again." The implication hung in the air like smoke. That night, Daniel wanted to leave, pack their things, break the lease, find somewhere else before the baby came, but Emma refused. Not because she wasn't afraid, she was terrified, but she understood something Daniel didn't. The woman in the attic, whether Margaret or Ghost or something in between, wasn't a threat. She was a refugee, someone who'd found the only place that felt safe and was trying desperately to survive in it. Emma knew that feeling, had felt it herself when the medical bills started piling up, when the insurance company denied their claims, when her boss fired her for missing too many shifts while recovering from pregnancy complications. That trapped, desperate sense of the world pressing in with nowhere left to go. She couldn't call the police, couldn't take away someone else's last refuge, not when she knew what it felt like to have none. The next day, while Daniel was at work, Emma climbed back into the attic. She brought a paper bag containing a bottle of water, a sandwich, an apple. She left it by the miniature house's door and retreated to the ladder. "I'm not going to hurt you," she said to the empty room. "I just want to help." Silence, but the air felt charged, watchful. Emma climbed down and went about her day. That evening, when she checked, the bag was gone. They communicated this way for days. Emma would leave food and water. Sometimes she'd include a note. "Are you okay? Do you need anything? My name is Emma." The offerings always disappeared, but there was never a response. Until one morning, Emma found a piece of paper tucked into the empty bag. The handwriting was shaky but legible. "Thank you. I'm sorry I scared you. I didn't know anyone lived here now." Emma's hands trembled as she wrote back, "Who are you?" The next day, Margaret, Helen's daughter. "This was my mother's place. It's the only place I've ever felt safe." Over the following weeks, their note exchange became a lifeline. Emma learned that Margaret was 63 years old, that she'd spent most of her life in institutions, that she'd found the attic 5 years ago after escaping her last group home and had been living here ever since, hiding whenever the duplex had tenants, emerging only when she thought it was safe. "I lost a baby once," one note read. "They took her from me, said I couldn't care for her properly. I was 17. I never saw her again. Sometimes I pretend she's still here, that I'm getting her ready for the day. That's why I keep the house nice." Emma sat on the attic floor and cried reading that. Cried for Margaret, for Helen, for all the women who'd been told they were too broken to deserve the things they needed, too sick, too poor, too damaged, too much. Her pregnancy was getting harder. The doctor had upgraded her to full bed rest. Any day now, she could go into preeclampsia. Her blood pressure was dangerously high, but she kept climbing that ladder, kept leaving notes and food, kept this secret from Daniel, who would absolutely lose his mind if he knew. She told herself she was being compassionate, being kind, but deep down, Emma knew the truth. She was building an alibi, proof that she tried to help. Because if something went wrong, if Margaret got discovered, if the police came, Emma needed to believe she'd done the right thing, even if she wasn't sure what that was anymore. The crisis came on a Thursday afternoon in late August. Emma had been feeling off all day, headache, blurred vision, swelling in her hands that wouldn't go down. She'd ignored it, told herself it was just the heat, just the stress. Daniel was working a double shift. She was alone. Around 4 p.m., she felt the first contraction. Not Braxton Hicks, real, hard, took her breath away. She called Daniel, no answer, called her doctor, got the answering service. They told her to go to the hospital immediately if contractions continued. The second contraction hit 10 minutes later. Emma tried to stand, and her vision swam. She gripped the kitchen counter, breathing through the pain, and realized with growing horror that something was very wrong. Her water hadn't broken. This was too early. The baby wasn't due for 2 more months. Third contraction, 7 minutes after the second. Emma fumbled for her phone, tried 911. No signal. The duplex was in a dead zone, one of the reasons the rent was so cheap. She'd have to get outside, to the street, to get a signal. But when she tried to move toward the door, her legs gave out. She went down hard, catching herself on one arm, the impact sending shockwaves through her pregnant belly. The baby went still inside her, terrifyingly still. Emma opened her mouth to scream and nothing came out, just a thin wheeze as another contraction seized her, harder than the others, wrong in a way her body recognized, even if her mind couldn't name it. She was having a seizure, preeclampsia, exactly what the doctor had warned her about. And she was going to die here, alone, on the kitchen floor of a rental duplex with no one coming. That's when she heard the ladder unfold above her head. Footsteps on the rungs, quick, sure, despite their owner's age. Then Margaret was there, kneeling beside Emma, with hands that shook but moved with purpose. "Don't move," Margaret said. Her voice was different now, clear, focused. "I'm calling for help." She grabbed Emma's phone, ran outside where the signal worked, and Emma heard her voice through the open door. "Ambulance, 447 Coastal Highway, pregnant woman, seizure, she needs help now." Then Margaret was back, kneeling beside Emma again, one hand on Emma's forehead, the other on her belly. "Listen to me," Margaret said firmly. "You're going to be okay. The baby's going to be okay, but you need to breathe. Can you breathe for me?" Emma tried, failed, tried again. "Good, that's good. Stay with me, Emma. Stay right here." The seizure passed. Emma's vision cleared slightly. She could see Margaret's face properly for the first time. Not frightening, just old and tired and deeply, terribly kind. "How did you know?" Emma whispered. "I heard you fall. I've been listening, always listening. That's what I do." The ambulance arrived 8 minutes later. Paramedics swarmed the kitchen. Margaret tried to slip away, but Emma grabbed her hand. "Don't go," Emma said. "Please." Margaret looked at her for a long moment, then she nodded and climbed into the ambulance. Emma gave birth that night via emergency C-section. The baby was tiny, barely 4 pounds, but her lungs were strong and her cry filled the delivery room with fierce, defiant life. They named her Sophie. Daniel arrived at the hospital 2 hours after the surgery, still in his work clothes, face white with terror. He found Emma in recovery, their daughter in her arms, and an old woman he'd never met sitting in the corner chair like she belonged there. "This is Margaret," Emma said quietly. "She saved our lives." Daniel looked between them, processing. Emma could see the moment he understood. His expression went through shock, confusion, anger, and finally landed on something like acceptance. He held out his hand. "Thank you." Margaret took it carefully, like she'd forgotten how to shake hands and was remembering. "She can't go back to the attic," Emma said. It wasn't a question. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. Then he sighed. "No, she can't." They worked it out over the next few weeks. Daniel called some connections from his union, people who knew people who could navigate the system. They got Margaret registered with social services, set her up in subsidized housing that actually treated her like a human being, gave her a phone, a contact list, a safety net she never had before. Before she left their lives, Margaret came to the hospital one last time. She brought something wrapped in cloth, a small photograph in a water-stained frame. "This was my daughter," Margaret said, showing Emma the picture. A baby, maybe 3 months old, with Margaret's eyes. "They took her from me when she was 6 months old. I never stopped missing her. never stopped wondering if she was safe. She looked at Sophie sleeping in Emma's arms. "Take care of her," Margaret whispered, "and take care of yourself. You're stronger than you know. Your mother would be proud." "My mother?" Emma said, confused. Margaret smiled sadly. "Helen. She used to say that, to me, before she couldn't leave the house anymore. Before the world got too big and frightening, she'd say, 'You're stronger than you know.' I think she was right. I just needed 70 years to believe it." Then she was gone. Emma and Daniel moved out of the duplex 3 months later, found a small house near Daniel's work with room for Sophie to grow. Before they left, Emma climbed into the attic one last time. The miniature house stood silent and empty, but on its tiny table, Emma left something: a photograph of Sophie, 3 months old, smiling with her whole face, and beside it, a note. "For the next woman who needs to remember she's not alone, thank you for saving us. You deserved better. E." Years later, Emma would sometimes think about Margaret, wonder where she was, if she was safe, if she'd finally found peace. She'd think about Helen, trapped in her miniature world, and about all the women who'd ever needed a smaller space just to breathe. She'd think about the systems that failed them, the people who dismissed them, the world that offered nowhere safe. And she'd hold Sophie close and whisper the words Margaret had given her: "You're stronger than you know." Because Emma had learned something in that attic, in those weeks of notes and fear and eventual trust. Survival isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, small. A miniature house in a forgotten attic where broken women practice living until the world becomes bearable again. Sometimes it's a stranger's hand in yours when you're seizing on a kitchen floor. Sometimes it's choosing compassion when fear would be easier. Emma never forgot that, never stopped being grateful for the woman who lived above her head and taught her, without meaning to, that the most terrifying thing isn't the stranger in your attic. It's how close any of us are to needing that attic ourselves.